The unthinkable has happened. Israel and Saudi Arabia have exchanged deadly missiles for the very first time, igniting fears of an uncontrollable Middle East war. What started as political rivalry has now erupted into the skies, with both nations trading devastating strikes. Stay with us as we break down exactly what went down, why it matters, and what it could mean for the entire world. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today's story is nothing short of shocking. For the first time in modern history, Israel and Saudi Arabia have openly traded missile fire, marking a turning point in the already fragile balance of the Middle East. This exchange of direct hostilities represents not just a regional conflict, but a potential spark for a wider war that could engulf neighboring nations and even drag in global superpowers. What began as long-standing mistrust has now escalated into a fiery confrontation that no one believed would reach this stage so soon. Reports confirm that Israel launched the initial barrage, claiming it was in response to intelligence suggesting Saudi-backed militias were planning strikes on Israeli targets. Within minutes, Saudi Arabia retaliated with ballistic missiles of its own, striking deep into Israeli territory. The skies lit up with explosions as both nations displayed their military power in ways that stunned onlookers around the world. This isn't just another skirmish or proxy battle. It's two powerful states directly clashing, something analysts have warned about for years. The symbolism of this conflict is profound. Two of the Middle East's most influential countries are no longer hiding behind indirect confrontations or political statements. Instead, they've taken the unprecedented step of unleashing their arsenals against each other. As we move forward, we'll explore the events leading up to this explosive moment, the reactions pouring in from world capitals, and the possible consequences for the future of global stability. The roots of this conflict run deep, and to fully understand why missiles are flying today, we need to revisit decades of tension. Saudi Arabia and Israel have never shared warm relations, despite both being strategic allies of the United States at different points in history. For years, Saudi leaders have openly opposed Israel's policies toward Palestine, while Israel has accused Saudi Arabia of funding or enabling groups that indirectly threaten its security. This underlying hostility has simmered beneath the surface, occasionally surfacing through diplomatic spats or covert accusations. However, the current escalation is tied to recent developments. In the past year, secret talks about Saudi-Israeli normalization stalled dramatically after Saudi officials demanded concessions on Palestinian statehood, concessions Israel refused to grant. At the same time, Saudi Arabia was strengthening its ties with Iran's rivals in the Gulf while seeking security guarantees from Washington. For Israel, this looked like a dangerous attempt to tilt the regional balance against its favor. Adding fuel to the fire were reports of Saudi investment in advanced missile defense systems and long-range strike capabilities. While Israel publicly downplayed these concerns behind closed doors, officials were deeply alarmed. Tensions escalated further when Israeli intelligence agencies claimed they uncovered evidence of Saudi involvement in arming militant factions near Gaza and Lebanon. By the time missiles began to fly, the mistrust had already hardened into open hostility. What makes this exchange so dangerous is that it signals a collapse of backdoor diplomacy, replaced instead by raw military confrontation. When the missiles actually launched, the world was caught off guard. According to initial reports, Israel's strike targeted military facilities inside Saudi territory that it alleged were being used to coordinate hostile activities against the Jewish state. The attack was swift, precise, and devastating, with explosions visible miles away. Israeli officials quickly released statements framing the strike as a preemptive measure designed to protect national security. But Saudi Arabia was not about to remain silent. Within hours, Saudi defense forces mobilized their ballistic arsenal and launched retaliatory missiles aimed at Israeli military installations and infrastructure. Sirens wailed across Israeli cities as citizens rushed into bomb shelters, reminiscent of past conflicts with Hamas or Hezbollah. But this time, the stakes were far higher. Videos circulated online showing fiery streaks in the sky, intercepted missiles exploding midair, and terrified civilians taking cover. The speed and ferocity of Saudi Arabia's response surprised even military analysts, proving that Riyadh was not only capable of defending itself, but also ready to go on the offensive. The exchanges didn't just stop at one round. Reports suggest multiple waves of strikes were exchanged over a tense 48-hour period. Neither side publicly admitted the extent of damage, but satellite images and eyewitness accounts confirmed that infrastructure on both sides suffered significant hits. What makes this unprecedented is the scale. This isn't just a minor border clash or a proxy fight. It's a direct state-to-state missile war, something that could easily spiral out of control if cooler heads don't prevail. Global reaction to the missile exchange was immediate and intense. In Washington, the White House called for restraint, urging both Israel and Saudi Arabia to halt further escalation. President's statements emphasized the danger of dragging the entire region into war and the catastrophic consequences that could follow if the conflict widens. At the United Nations, an emergency session was called with diplomats from dozens of countries condemning the violence and pleading for an urgent ceasefire. Russia and China, both of whom maintain ties with Riyadh and Tel Aviv, issued carefully worded statements. Russia warned that any further strikes could destabilize oil markets, while China stressed the importance of protecting global trade routes, particularly those in the Gulf. Meanwhile, European leaders voiced concern that the conflict might lead to another refugee crisis, compounding existing humanitarian disasters in the region. Arab nations were divided. While some expressed solidarity with Saudi Arabia, others quietly urged de-escalation to avoid a regional conflagration. Iran, Saudi Arabia's longtime rival, seized the opportunity to issue fiery statements criticizing both Riyadh and Tel Aviv, portraying the violence as a failure of U.S.-backed diplomacy. On social media, hashtags related to the conflict trended globally within hours. Millions watched live footage of missile interceptions, while influencers and political commentators debated whether this marked the beginning of a full-scale war. The sheer speed with which the world reacted highlights just how significant and dangerous this moment is. The world is watching, and the pressure for both sides to back down is enormous. Economically, the repercussions of this conflict are already being felt across the globe. Almost immediately after news of the missile strikes broke, oil prices surged, with markets fearing a disruption of Saudi supply. Analysts warned that if the conflict drags on, energy costs could skyrocket, potentially plunging the global economy into instability. Given Saudi Arabia's critical role in global oil production, even a partial disruption could send shockwaves through every industry dependent on energy. Meanwhile, Israel's economy also took a hit. The country has a thriving technology sector, but its global investors are notoriously sensitive to instability. Stock markets in Tel Aviv fell sharply as companies scrambled to assess the risks posed by an open-ended military conflict. Tourism, already struggling due to regional tensions, could collapse entirely if the war escalates further. But beyond the numbers, the human cost is beginning to mount. Thousands of civilians on both sides have fled major cities, seeking refuge in safer areas. Hospitals in Israel and Saudi Arabia are bracing for casualties, while aid organizations warn of an impending humanitarian crisis if the strikes intensify. International NGOs have already begun preparing emergency response teams in case a wider war breaks out. The ripple effects extend far beyond the region. Nations dependent on Gulf energy are bracing for shortages, while airlines have rerouted flights to avoid dangerous airspace. The entire global economy is suddenly hostage to the decisions made in Riyadh and Tel Aviv. The financial costs of this war are staggering, but the human suffering could be far worse. Militarily, this conflict is showcasing the full power of modern weaponry. Israel is widely recognized for its advanced defense systems, most notably the Iron Dome, which intercepted a large portion of Saudi missiles. However, analysts were surprised to see that Saudi Arabia's arsenal, often dismissed as underdeveloped, proved highly effective. Their ballistic missiles not only penetrated Israeli defenses, but also caused tangible damage to military and industrial facilities. This exchange highlights a sobering reality. Both nations possess formidable capabilities that can inflict serious harm. Israel's edge lies in precision strikes and cutting-edge technology, while Saudi Arabia's advantage is sheer volume and financial capacity to sustain a long fight. The balance of power, once thought to heavily favor Israel, now looks far more uncertain. What makes this even more alarming is the potential for escalation into other domains. Cyber warfare has already been reported, with claims of major cyber attacks targeting power grids, banks, and government servers. In addition, both sides are testing drones and unmanned systems to complement missile attacks, raising the stakes of this new type of warfare. Experts warn that if either side chooses to escalate further, the battlefield could expand beyond traditional military targets, drawing in civilian infrastructure and risking mass casualties. Furthermore, the possibility of involving allies, such as the U.S., for Israel or Gulf partners for Saudi Arabia, could turn a bilateral conflict into a regional or even global war. In short, this missile exchange isn't just a dangerous clash, it's a demonstration of how destructive modern warfare has become. Public sentiment within both countries is deeply polarized. In Israel, many citizens support their government's decision to strike first, citing national security and the constant threat of hostile forces. However, others are fearful that provoking Saudi Arabia could backfire, leading to a war that Israel cannot afford. The haunting memories of past conflicts with Hamas and Hezbollah loom large, but this time, the adversary is far more powerful. In Saudi Arabia, state media has framed the retaliatory strikes as a defense of national pride and sovereignty. Many Saudis have rallied behind the government, praising its ability to stand up to a militarily superior foe. Yet, within private circles, there is deep anxiety about what prolonged conflict could mean for the kingdom's stability and economic reforms. Ordinary Saudis worry about safety, economic hardship, and the possibility of foreign intervention. Social media platforms are filled with contrasting emotions: patriotism, anger, fear, and calls for peace. Hashtags supporting both nations trend simultaneously, while graphic videos of the attacks stir public outrage. For many in the region, this conflict has shattered the illusion of stability and progress that leaders have tried to project in recent years. The broader Middle Eastern public is also reacting strongly. Citizens in neighboring countries express fear that their nations could be dragged into the chaos. In war-torn regions like Yemen and Syria, people see the conflict as yet another devastating reminder that peace in the Middle East remains as elusive as ever. As the conflict rages, attention turns to the possibility of mediation. Historically, the United States has played the role of peace broker in Middle Eastern disputes. However, its influence has waned in recent years, with Washington struggling to balance its relationships with both Tel Aviv and Riyadh. Current U.S. attempts at diplomacy face skepticism, with both nations accusing America of bias. Other powers, such as Russia and China, may see this as an opportunity to step into the vacuum. Russia has offered to host emergency talks, while China has hinted at using its growing economic leverage to push for de-escalation. Yet, the challenge remains immense. Neither Israel nor Saudi Arabia wants to appear weak, and both are determined to prove their strength. Regional organizations like the Arab League have called for unity and peace, but divisions among Arab states weaken the effectiveness of their appeals. Meanwhile, the United Nations has dispatched envoys, but so far no breakthrough has been achieved. The danger is that while diplomats debate, missiles continue to fly. Without immediate de-escalation, mistrust could harden into an entrenched war. Mediators are racing against time to establish a ceasefire, but the window of opportunity is closing fast. Analysts warn that if this initial exchange spirals into a sustained campaign, the Middle East could face its most destructive conflict in decades. The urgency for diplomacy has never been greater, yet the willingness of leaders to compromise has never been lower. The clock is ticking. Looking ahead, the potential scenarios are both grim and unpredictable. One possibility is a negotiated ceasefire where both nations agree to halt strikes in exchange for international guarantees. This outcome, while difficult, could stabilize the situation and prevent further loss of life. However, given the intensity of the current exchanges, many fear it may already be too late for simple diplomacy. Another scenario is a prolonged war of attrition. Both Israel and Saudi Arabia have the resources to sustain military operations for weeks, if not months. In this case, the damage to infrastructure, economies, and human lives would be catastrophic. Such a conflict would likely spill over into neighboring countries, dragging them into a war they cannot avoid. There is also the terrifying possibility of outside powers getting directly involved. If Iran perceives Saudi weakness, it may seek to exploit the situation. Likewise, if the U.S. feels its ally Israel is in danger, it could provide military support. The involvement of these heavyweights could transform a regional conflict into a full-scale global crisis. Lastly, we cannot ignore the possibility of uncontrolled escalation into unconventional warfare. With cyber attacks already underway and rumors of drone swarms being prepared, the battlefield of tomorrow may look very different from traditional wars of the past. In short, the road ahead is filled with uncertainty, and the world anxiously awaits the next moves from Riyadh and Tel Aviv. Every decision made now carries consequences that could reverberate across generations. As we close today's coverage, it's clear that the missile exchange between Israel and Saudi Arabia marks a turning point in history. The skies over the Middle East have literally caught fire, and with each passing hour, the risk of a wider war grows. What makes this conflict especially alarming is that it involves two nations considered central pillars of the region. One with unmatched technological might, the other with immense financial and strategic weight. The events we've discussed highlight not only the fragility of peace in the Middle East, but also the interconnectedness of our world. From soaring oil prices to cyber warfare threats, the ripple effects of this confrontation extend to every corner of the globe. It is a sobering reminder that no nation, no matter how distant, is truly insulated from the consequences of war. What happens next will depend on the choices made by leaders in Riyadh, Tel Aviv, Washington, Moscow, and beyond. Will diplomacy prevail, or will the world witness another prolonged, devastating war in the Middle East? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the stakes have never been higher. This story is still developing, and we will continue to monitor every update, every statement, and every shift in this rapidly evolving situation. If you want to stay informed, make sure you don't miss what comes next. So, if you found this analysis valuable, please like this video, share it with others who need to understand the gravity of this situation, and subscribe for more in-depth coverage.